Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it's just an episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast. No, Tony, it's a very special, in fact, live episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast. So I'm even better than normal, Tony. And more importantly, how are you?
That is more important. You are correct. I'm doing well. As always, I love emergency podcast 8:45 on a Monday night. And here we are. Breaking news. Avon Lake offensive lineman Maxwell Riley, to be formal, has committed to Ohio State. The number 4 player in the state of Ohio per the composite, the number 1 overall offensive lineman in the state of Ohio, the number 87 player overall in the 24/7's own rankings, the number 7 offensive tackle, 6'5", 280. Tom, this was one that Ohio State needed to do as well as they can in state, because this is a good in-state class of linemen, and they've already seen one guy head off to Clemson, and they were finally able to hold off Dabo here and land a commitment from Maxwell Riley, who announced his commitment tonight on social media.
Yeah, Adam Guthrie was the one who was in state. He's a Washington Courthouse, Miami Trace guy. He committed to Clemson just a day or two ago. Mm-hmm. So at that point, it was like, all right, well, Tyler Bowen, let's see what you got. And this is one of these things where you have to capitalize it when you have like a class where you've got a lot of like really solid in-state offensive linemen. You have to capitalize on that, because if you think back through the guys, when you have a Paris Johnson in state, you got to get him. When you have a Carter Lowe in state, you got to get him, because we've seen just over the years it's hard to bring in a bunch of out-of-state guys on the offensive line, and this needs to be a deep class for them in the offensive line, because they brought in relatively small classes recently. You had the foundation of a very, very good class in state. And then Guthrie commits to Clemson, and there's a long way to go till signing day. And Tyler Bowen is we have seen and heard all about what a great recruiter he is, and he this is a real chance to maybe he can rebuild that relationship with Adam Guthrie. But to bring in a Max Riley, who is as you said, the highest rated of the in-state tackle prospects. And, you go down the list of the tackle prospects nationally, and it's like, boy, a lot of the names right above him are the names that everyone national is drooling about. This is not just like, well, you have to get an in-state guy. This is, okay, now you got the best in-state guy. Now continue and go build on that. But this is a huge early win for Tyler Bowen.
On Friday, when we talked to Ryan Day and peppered him with questions, one of the questions was about Tyler Bowen's recruiting. And the question was, what are your expectations for his recruiting? And when you're talking to him and you're in the hiring process, like, what are your expectations for his recruiting? And his answer is big. You guys could probably already see he's making an impact. He's getting guys here. He works hard at it. He makes connections. He builds relationships. He can evaluate at a high level. I think with some of the guys we have on the offensive staff together, you're starting to see more group recruiting there as well. And when you're talking about group recruiting, you get Carlos Lockton and Brian Hartline, and we'll see what Billy Fessler can do. Ohio State it recruits itself with the quarterbacks right now with Ryan Day, but don't sell Billy Fessler short in that regard. And Keenan Bailey, look at his tight end room. So when you talk about group recruiting on the Ohio State offense, you add Tyler Bowen into the mix, and they could really start to take off. And as Fort Wayne Buckeye asks, does this mean that Coach Bowen is off the hot seat for a few days? Yes, he was on the hot seat right away. Ryan Day is talking up his recruiting, and like 2 days later, Adam Guthrie leaves the state, and it's like, well, there's another miss for Bowen, I guess. And he's still like, he's not even moved into his house yet, and he's already getting some grief. But now again, he can relax for a little bit, but not relax, just continue to build, because this is the first offensive lineman in the 2026 class, and they're in on some guys like 5-star Felix Ojo from Texas. He's going to be coming in, and that's kind of one of the guys that Ryan Day is referring to when he says that Tyler Bowen is able to bring some guys in. So, that's the key. Get them into Columbus, and then start to really feel that message.
Yeah, and some of the guys that are at the top of that list, like Felix Ojo, Emmanuel Iniacho, like those are guys who we've seen at camp in previous years, and those guys are both uncommitted right now. But yeah, this is something where you're sort of starting the process over to a certain degree with Tyler Bowen, because Virginia Tech is not typically swimming in the same kind of ponds as Ohio State when you're talking about recruiting. These are, sure, you're going to have some overlap, but in a lot of cases, these are going to be guys where you're sort of starting that relationship sort of all over. And that's going to be, getting off to a good start is going to be important. But getting off to a good start right now, in a lot of cases, just means getting these guys on campus to sit down and spend some time and not just be texting, not just be on the phone. Like, I mean, you know the difference in your personal, interpersonal relationships. If you're just texting with someone, that's one thing. If you're emailing with someone, that's one thing. When you sit down and you have a face-to-face meeting with someone, then it's like, okay, then you start to feel like you know them. And that's, like in business, you go have coffee with someone. It's like, oh, okay, like this is like a much more real thing. When you're coming on a visit to campus, that's in some cases a multi-day thing. This is not just like, let's go grab coffee. This is like a really big thing. And so if you can get these guys on campus, that is an enormous first step in starting to build those relationships, those personal relationships, where it's not just the school. It's not just, okay, I know what the facilities look like, but I know the people who are going to be coaching me. And it's not just Tyler Bowen, because Tyler Bowen is the offensive line coach in name, but they brought in multiple assistant offensive line coaches and offensive line analysts and all sorts of stuff. This is a whole new team of guys where you can tell talking to Tyler Bowen what they're selling here. And it's, selling Ohio State is not a particularly difficult thing. And with Tyler Bowen and with all these other guys who they have on staff who have this track record in terms of developing offensive linemen, you just have to sit them down and so you can do the coffee is for closers thing, but you have to get them in the building first. And they are, I mean, if you just follow a lot of these offensive linemen on social media, you can see like they're going hard after a lot of guys, and they're seeing some immediate results in terms of just getting those guys on campus and starting to build those relationships.
Yeah, another top Ohio guy, Sam Greer, is another guy that they're going to be in on at that tackle position. So they're going to be working to rebuild that offensive line. And of course, the portal will also be part of that as well, because those guys come almost ready-made for what you need. So and then there's other out-of-state guys that they're also in on, and we'll see how many visits they get in the spring, whether it's official, unofficial. Like like Champ Smith, Mark Givler has talked about out of Florida is one of those names. Could be inside, could be outside, and that even like losing the in-state has not gone well. Will Conroy was a guy who was an in-state kid, transferred to IMG. He's going to go to Oklahoma. So what little fence there is around Ohio right now, Tyler Bowen is certainly trying to reinforce that with this first commit for him. And we'll see where it goes from there, because everybody talks about how great he is as a recruiter. And now he's at a place where you can really show it and be seen and be heard and get into any doors you want. And so now it's time to go do it. And it's great to land the top offensive, line kid in Ohio, which too often we just assume that's going to happen. And then when it doesn't, it's like, what are we doing here? And so I do think you do need to give the coach credit for doing what some have not been able to. And we've seen how many times over the years have we seen the top offensive lineman in the state go to, Notre Dame or Clemson or wherever. And now it's like, it's a good Ohio class, and you're kind of trying to hold on to the ones that you can now. And we'll see. Things are off to a decent start for Tyler Bowen, because again, he's only been here for a little bit. So kind of grading him on a very, very different scale than anybody previously.
For sure. I don't think you're really going to see the true Tyler Bowen impact in recruiting until at least this summer, and even maybe probably longer into the cycle. I think people don't necessarily understand everyone is aware. Yes, Ohio State just won the national championship. It was on TV and everything. Everyone saw it. You don't typically see the national championship bump in recruiting in a lot of cases, even until the next cycle. So that's not necessarily like a 2026 thing, because the 2026 guys, in a lot of cases, have already done a bunch of the visits. They've already kind of narrowed things down a little bit. And yeah, I mean, seeing a team win the national championship is great, but it doesn't necessarily show up immediately. That's something where that might be something you see more next year. So this is not like of course they got the top in-state kid that just won the national championship. Like, that doesn't necessarily show up immediately. And as you said, there have been plenty of years where you look at the top in-state guys, and there are other programs in the Midwest that people, or across the nation, that people choose to go to. Like, not everyone in Ohio grows up an Ohio State fan and only dreaming of playing at Ohio State. And, turns out, Tony, there are Catholic families in Ohio too, and some of them like to go to Notre Dame. That's a thing that happens. And sometimes people just connect well with someone like Dabo Swinney. Sometimes people connect well with people, with other programs. There are other programs that compete at a national level. And, you don't always go to school where you grew up. I grew up in the Northeast. Guess what? I was able to turn Jim Calhoun down, Tony. I said, how much are you going to pay me? He said, not a dime. There's a deep cut for you. So that's not, and there are people who, who was the kid in, there was it was Donovan Jackson. I just heard someone talking about who you think of an out-of-state prospect, and Donovan Jackson was talking about the fact that he, was looking at all these schools. His mom's like, "That's great, you're going to Ohio State," because his mom was an Ohio State fan. So, there are people in Ohio who are Clemson fans or whatever, and may have family ties to other schools. So it's not a given that you get every highly ranked in-state player. In this case, they did, and. If you had to really like make a wish list of positions, where does Ohio State really need more people and really need more highly ranked elite kind of top level players, they really need to restock that offensive line room, because we've talked about this before. They lost a ton of players, especially at tackle after last season. And that's one of those places where you can bring guys in the portal, and they've had a remarkably high hit rate at those spots, but you're not going to be able to portal 5 offensive linemen every year. And tackles are some of the most sought after and difficult to land guys in the portal. So that's a spot where you've got to have guys in your program who you're developing, because you're not going to have a 100% hit rate. And if you don't have 2 good tackles, that is something that can derail your season.
Well, and then you're putting a lot of stock in the portal tackles bailing you out, or the portal offensive lineman, and it doesn't always work out that way. Ohio State has gotten fortunate, but they're not perfect, and they certainly haven't batted 1,000 on that. I do like that Donovan Jackson's mom is essentially Chris Spielman's dad in terms of like, where you're going to go to school. Well, I was thinking about Texas, or I was thinking about Michigan. No, you're going to Ohio State. That's what you're doing. So I want you to zip your mouth right now and pack your bags, because you're going to Columbus. And now Max Riley is the 5th commitment in the 2026 class for Ohio State. Tom, are you getting concerned yet? 4 of the 5 are offensive players. So we know they brought in a bunch of defensive guys, and you're like, oh, Ryan Day has finally flipped the switch, and it's not just going to be 16 offensive guys and 5 defensive guys. They're really hammering that defense, and now it's just, there's one defensive guy, and it's cornerback Jacob Weatherspoon from Avon. So come on, Tom. This is going to be another 30-man class, 24 people on the offensive side of the ball. I can already feel it.
Yeah, and just looking at the top in-state prospects, and I'm just using the 247 composite right now just for simplicity's sake. The number 1 player in Ohio is, in fact, on defense. That's cornerback Albert Hill. Currently 100% crystal ball to Ohio State. Sincere Johnson, linebacker out of Glenville. The Glenville to Ohio State pipeline is alive and well. So there are some top defensive prospects in the state who they're going for. And, you look at some of the guys on the defense, and, I will challenge anyone to be concerned about cornerback recruiting while Tim Walton is there. I will challenge anyone to be concerned about linebacker recruiting when James Laurinaitis is there. Larry Johnson just brought in 5 or 6, I think it was 6 defensive linemen last cycle. Like this is this is not exactly a huge concern right now. Ohio State, obviously, it's very, very early in the cycle, but Ohio State continues to bring in very, very highly ranked players. I was just going to try and pull up the class for Ohio State just to run through it for people who maybe are not remembering. Chris Henry, wide receiver, obviously out of modern day, but out of a lot of places. Maxwell Riley, second highest. Jacob Witherspoon, third highest. Jaden Rickards, the wide receiver out of Watkins Memorial, is again a 4-star, and then Corbin Fordham, tight end out of the Bullis School, Tony, in Jacksonville, Florida. They have five commits listed right there. So there you go.
I'm looking through this list of Ohio players, and the number 9 player in the state is Braden Fogel, who is the tight end for Lexington. I actually watched them against Bodpen Miller's team last year.
In the 7-on-7 or in an actual game?
In the actual game.
Okay.
If I recall. And when they needed, when Bodpen's team, I believe it's just Mansfield High School. No, it's Ontario High School.
Ontario. Mm-hmm.
When they needed a stop, they would put him on Fogel, like as a corner. So you got the 6'4" rangy corner out there running around when he's not running for his life as the quarterback. So it's interesting seeing some of these names that we've seen Sincere Johnson at camp, and he's a big kid, not Arvell Reese big, but not small in terms of linebackers. So Ohio's doing pretty good as expected. And Matt Patricia spoke highly of Ohio recruiting. He's been in the NFL, and he sees all of these Ohio players that end up in the NFL. Not all of those Ohio players end up at Ohio State, though. They matriculate throughout the country and in the MAC and all of those places and end up doing pretty well in the NFL.
Yeah, that's the basis of every Ohio State recruiting class is always the state of Ohio. And, you can go back and find probably almost a verbatim quote from every Ohio State coach going back, I'm going to guess, at least to Woody Hayes, and probably before, back then it was like, well, where else would you recruit? But, since recruiting has become more national under, like John Cooper is when it really kind of became more of a national thing. Every Ohio State coach, I can remember them almost verbatim saying the foundation of every good class at Ohio State starts with players from the state of Ohio. And, sometimes that's 12 guys, and sometimes that's 7 guys, and sometimes that's 14 guys. But that is where you get your, that's where you get a lot of your linemen. It's where you get a lot of your corners. You get a lot of those guys. That's where, you can't necessarily find, Ohio is a place where, like, nationally people come to Ohio to recruit linemen. Like, this is a place where that talent is, generally there are at least 2, 3, 4 Power 5 level good players on the offensive line most years at Ohio State or in Ohio. And then that doesn't necessarily mean they're all Ohio State good. This is a particularly deep class on the offensive line in the state of Ohio, but that it is a state where people know you can come to find Ohio, good offensive linemen. And so to get the guy ranked the best of those in-state offensive linemen in a year when that class is pretty deep in offensive line, that's a pretty good win.
Yeah, I was just go ahead.
I'm just scrolling through. Mika says linebacker as well. Yes, yeah, linebacker is definitely a spot where you can, you're generally good. There is not always a quarterback in Ohio who is Ohio State good. There's pretty much always at least an offensive lineman and a linebacker in Ohio who is Ohio State good. Like, I'm struggling to remember a year when that wasn't true. It's pretty consistent.
Well, Tom, that sounds like a summer project. We can go through all of the years of the worst years in Ohio recruiting when they didn't produce this, they didn't produce that. But yeah, generally you can get those guys that'll smash their face into other people's faces in a violent way.
Yeah, and let's see. I'm just sort of scrolling through here to see if there's anything else. Yeah, is he close to Jacob Witherspoon? I don't know that.
Here's also a thing that I just got a text saying, because in the commitment post that I just wrote, I said, Jacob Witherspoon is also from the same town of Avon, and I got told they don't really like to be told that Avon Lake and Avon are the same thing, and so yes, I am. I'll fix it. Calm down, everybody.
And speaking of Avon Lake and Ohio State linebackers, we do need to give Mike DeAndrea a shout out. The former he was one of the all-time great in-state linebacker prospects. Had knee issues and didn't pan out at the college level, but man, oh man, he was part of that 2002 class up at Avon Lake. And I mean, that was the class that had Maurice Claret and AJ Hawk and Bobby Carpenter and Troy Smith and all those guys. But yeah, Mike DeAndrea was right. Mike DeAndrea and Justin Zwick were right at the top of the list in terms of the hype for that class. I was part of I remember covering that. I was in charge of our coverage at the NBC4 in Columbus for that day, and that was DeAndrea and Zwick were the two enormous deals, and then there was this kid at Glenville, Troy something, and I mean, I don't think we actually got up there. It was because we had the other stuff to cover up in the Cleveland area, but yeah, it was definitely a big name from Avon Lake.
Did you go get that 3-star scrub from Centerville, AJ Hawk?
Yeah, I think we probably had our Dayton station go get that one for us, but yeah, it was. I think we might have had someone go up in the helicopter up to Avon Lake. I have a memory of sending someone in the helicopter up to Avon Lake, which anyway, TV was a very different business back in 2002 as compared to how it is in 2025. But that's a whole different show. Speaking of whole different show, Billy Tuesday says, just worried about the defensive line recruiting now.
Oh, it needs to start getting started here pretty soon. This is Ohio State's first commitment since January 2nd. So it's, enough celebrating of the national championship guys. That was last year, but there is a lot of catch up that has to be done, catching up, because they spent all of December and January in playoff mode and not in recruiting mode. So there is going to be some catch up that needs to be done there. And, you do what you can. And then Larry Johnson's always going to be battling the rumors. The first question he got on Friday, another year, huh? Is basically the question. And and I think there was the same thing the year before. How much longer are you going to do this? And he's like, I'm here, aren't I? So I'm doing it now.
Larry Johnson has been getting those questions for so long that Nick Bosa was getting asked about, are you sure Larry's going to be here for your whole time? No. He's turns out Larry's going to be there for Nick Bosa's whole time, and then Chase Young's whole time, and then Zach Harrison's whole time, and then JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer's whole time. Yes. Omar Austin, super chat from our buddy, wants to know, is he an interior lineman or an offensive tackle?
Well, I mean, I think you try everybody. Yeah, exactly. And he's listed as a tackle. He's ranked as a tackle. So generally, if you're already ranked as a tackle, they try to be as if there's a good possibility you're going to end up inside, they won't even call you a tackle. And if they see you and they say you can't really move, then they're going to put you as an interior offensive line prospect in the rankings. But he's listed at 280, so he can move well enough right now. But yeah, you start them outside, and then you see where they go from there. And sometimes you move inside, you move outside, a la Donovan Jackson. It's just wherever the need is greater. But, I think they're looking at him as an exterior guy, an outside guy, a tackle, until he tells you that he can't, until he shows you that he can't.
Yeah, and I don't know off the top of my head what kind of offense Avon Lake runs, but whenever I see a guy rated as an offensive tackle, that's always kind of one of the first things I wonder is, what is the high school offense like? Because I go back to Josh Myers when he was at where's he, Miamisburg? Was that his high school? Yeah, Miamisburg. And he was always listed as a tackle, and they ran it was a wing tee or something, and it was just he never had to pass block. So then he got to, and he was rated as a 5-star tackle. And then he got to Ohio State, and it was kind of oh, hey, that's Joey Bosa, or Nick Bosa. I don't remember who it was at that point, but it's well, this is hard. And then he turned into a fantastic interior offensive lineman. But yeah, you're always going to start him on the outside. And then, because it's easier if you're big and strong, then the question is, are your arms long enough, or your feet quick enough, all that kind of stuff to play outside? If not, then you can certainly move inside. But yeah, that's always going to be their first choice. Ryan Dawes says, is Max short for Maximilian or Maximus? It is short for Maxwell. It is. He's actually listed as Maxwell, and I think on some of the recruiting
on
stuff.
the 24/7. Tom,
24/7, yeah.
Yeah. The Max LeBlanc. Can you give us the French pronunciation of his full name? Because I believe
it is, I probably can.
Maxence, Maxence, Maxence.
Maxence. Oh, yes. I don't know. I may be in Quebec in like a month or so. So if I am, Blue Jackets have a pretty big game coming up against the Ottawa Senators that have my eye on in terms of an out of town. And
so you aren't going to be trying to like sneak in some lumber or anything, are you?
Hacksaw Jim Duggan style, yes. Like, well, yeah. It's listen. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be French adjacent. So, because I did not know this, but this is probably one of the things I probably should have picked up at some point. But Ottawa is right across the river from Quebec, so I will, while I am there, probably try and pick up some macarons and try and figure out how exactly to say Maxence. That would be my two orders of my two tasks while I'm up there.
Maxwell Riley's full name is Maximus Decimus Meridius Riley. So just want to clear that up.
Offensive tackle prospect and consul of Rome. So there you go. Omar Austin says Superman's middle name is Jerome Clark Jerome Kent. I thought that was
never in a million years would I have guessed that one.
Jeremiah Jerome Smith, possibly also. I mean, speaking of Superman adjacent, yeah, it is. Yeah, this is, as Russ says, this is great news for Ohio State. This is a very, very big addition at a very, very important position where they really needed to. This is a position where they've really got to have a pretty good and deep class. This is a very, very big first piece to start building that class upon, Tony.
Yeah, I'm looking through. I think we've tackled all of the questions. There was one about, as I scroll through here real quickly, about this year being a rebuilding year.
Oh yeah,
and I would just say that there's no such thing as a rebuilding year because everybody's rebuilding. Like, so if everybody's rebuilding, nobody's rebuilding. And when you look at what Ohio State's, bringing back, show me the best team in a nation, or show me the four best teams in a nation. And if you're the sixth best team in a nation, then you're not rebuilding. You're going to be competing for a national championship. So I think, yeah, you lose a ton. So don't expect to be as good as you were last year. But Ohio State down the stretch was so good. They were double-digit points better than everybody they played in the playoffs. You don't need to be that good this year. You just need to be 1 point better than everybody you play in the playoffs, and that's good enough. So I think when you look at all the things, the areas they're rebuilding, I like their pieces and parts better than most teams. So I think you should have the same expectations. Like 10-2 is a real. You should be 10-2. If that's almost a disappointing regular season anymore at Ohio State. Certainly it was last year. But if this team is 10-2 again, are you happy? Are you disappointed? Or does it just matter what you do in the playoffs? And I think that makes everything, that smooths everything over. But I think you expect playoff wins. And I don't know if that's 3 playoff wins, 4 playoff wins, or 1. Just, you expect it.
Yeah. And this is the point of the year where everyone puts out their way too early top 25, which is like, they put it out because people click on it, but it's like, it's right there in the name. Like, it's way too early to be looking at teams like that. You got to see where people are when you go through spring, and then you've got a whole post-spring portal. And so you don't have the final version of teams yet. And someone on some team is going to get hurt this spring. And I mean, all that stuff will kind of change the national picture a little bit. But, if you want to look at the purely objective numbers of SP Plus, which is Bill Connolly's system, and he looks at returning production and all that kind of stuff. So he is aware of all the guys Ohio State lost. You will never guess who the number 1 team in the nation is. It is the Ohio State Buckeyes in SP Plus right now. And Will that, I don't expect them to be the number one team in the country this year. I think you are going to see a little bit of a step back. But when you have a roster as talented as Ohio State's, where, you just lost Will Howard, and he was an amazing quarterback. Guess what? You have a 5-star quarterback who Nick Saban wanted. He is, certainly one of your front runners, at least for the job this year. You've got really, you have probably the most talented player in the nation on defense returning in Caleb Downs. You have probably the most talented player in the nation on offense in Jeremiah Smith returning this year. Like, the schedule was challenging, and they very well might lose their first game of the season. Like, they are, I would guess, going to be underdogs against, I haven't looked at the line. Are they underdogs against Texas? I would guess. Probably.
I don't know, and I don't know that they will be, but
it doesn't really matter at this point, since it is in fact March 10th and not August 28th or whatever it is. But it's, this is a team that is going to have a roster that is potentially talented enough to win the national championship. And there are only really probably like 6 to 8 teams in the nation that can say that. And we'll see. Once you see what the offensive line looks like, and once you see how the defense, all the replacements on defense sort of shake out over the course of the spring, and then once you see whether they're able to add depth in a couple key spots on the roster after the spring, there's a lot of those sort of things to shake out. But right now, Ohio State is one of the within 2 handfuls of teams to be able to, that is talented enough to legitimately challenge for the national championship this year, which this time of year is about all you can get. Like, I don't think there is a clear cut, definite most talented team in the country this year. There's going to be a lot of contenders for that, but Ohio State is in that conversation. And at this time of year, especially with a new shiny trophy for everyone to look at and gaze at adoringly in the lobby of the Woody Hayes, like that's pretty good for this time of year.
You're doing all of this talking, and I'm trying to check out a future line, and I haven't been on any of my apps in forever. So it's like I'm having to update and sign back in. And by all this time, I'm sure we've got like 6 answers already. Like, no, you idiot. It's on what it is.
Yeah, no.
But, let me see, Tom.
TK says we're currently mildly favored, which is, that's
as opposed to like medium or spicy.
Yes, mediumly favored. Mildly favored. -3. Yeah, I was gonna say that
Home
feels
field.
like a field goal. There you go.
Home field advantage, basically.
Yep.
So there you go. Guaranteed Ohio State wins. Good job.
Heard it here first.
That is on DraftKings for anybody asking, because I see other people throwing other names. Anything else that we need to touch on, Tom?
I think we've kind of gotten. I think we've hit the big pieces on here, and then we'll. Tony, I have great news for you. This will probably not be the last podcast that you and I do about the Ohio State Buckeyes, even this week, in fact. And there isn't even spring football yet this week. Spring football, Tony, just 6 days away.
And we do not have our schedule yet as to what we will be doing. I do expect to be there for the entire first practice, but we will see. And certainly we'll be there after for perhaps a live show, unless time does not permit. But we're going to tell you everything that we saw, everything that we heard. So as always, hit the bell to be notified. Hit the thumbs up if you're watching this. We would appreciate it. And subscribe to the channel if you have not yet done so. And you can always find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com, where we are talking about all of this on the Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus. So thank you all for tuning in tonight, and we will talk to you all later.